So I would like to welcome you to this webinar series, which is hosted by Tides Business Incubator at IIT Roorkee. IIT Roorkee is the oldest engineering institute in the country, in Asia. Everybody is now here inside the room, waiting eagerly to hear you speaking about technology trends and innovation during pandemic, these challenging times. Definitely, this is challenging, but we also would like to point out some silver lining in this, some opportunities where we can actually work in. In the audience today, we have students, we have startups, we have startup founders, entrepreneurs, faculty from IIT Roorkee as well as from neighboring institutes. So we have a lot of regional enthusiasts who are eagerly waiting for you to speak. Before handing over the podium to you, I would just like to briefly introduce you to the audience. Alan Rosling has been the international business leader, former executive director for Tata Sons. He was a special advisor to United Kingdom Prime Minister John Major from 1991 to 1993. Commander of the British Empire in 2014, author of the best-selling book Boom Company. I have read that book. It's a very interesting book. Still available in my shelf. He was also chairman of this is the chairman and co-founder of EQ. He's the chairman of the Jardine Matheson Group and educated and Harvard Business School. Before we begin, I would request the audience to please put their mic on mute so that there is no disturbance from the background. And with this request, I will ask Alan to please take up the podium. It's all yours now.
Okay, Azam, thank you very much indeed, and everybody, good afternoon or good evening here in Hong Kong. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm not a technologist, so please understand where I'm coming from, and if you have questions, please appreciate that I'm not going to be able to answer technical questions. I'm a business guy. I did, however, train as an historian, so and I continue to learn about India, so I did not know that IIT Roorkee is the oldest technical institution engineering college in Asia. So it is incredible what one learns about India every day. That's one of the reasons I completely am absorbed by your fantastic country. I'm going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, if that's okay with everybody, and then do Q&A. And already we've had some really good questions, particularly one or two I really like. For example, Pooja Agarwal's question, I think it's fantastic. I'd love to talk about that. Thank you, Pooja. Let me just take you back a little bit to talk about where I come from on technology. I guess I'm a little older than many of the guys on the call. And I was at school in the early 1970s, when I guess many of you guys were not even around. I remember a teacher when I was at school telling us about the Apollo moon mission. So Neil Armstrong had been landed on the moon just a couple of years before. And the teacher gave us the view that all of the money that America had spent, which was something like $25 billion, which in those days, of course, was a lot more than it is today, $25 billion, and the only technology of application to mankind that had come out of it, according to this teacher, was the non-stick frying pan and the digital watch. In those days, we had kind of Casio digital watches, chunky things that had digital displays, and we thought with the bee's knees. It then, of course, got to pocket calculators, and therefore the idea that sending a man to the moon just resulted in the digital watch was rather farcical. Then, of course, the digital watch became the calculator, and the calculator became the computer, and the computer became the internet. And therefore, over the last whatever it is, 50 years since then, I've watched the digital watch transforming mankind. And in many ways, it's a transformation which is just as deep and profound as the Industrial Revolution, where some people playing around with steam produced the steam engine, which produced the mile and steel industry, transportation, transport, and everything else, electric light, and so on. So technological innovation is something which is, I think, very hard to predict quite how it'll advance. When I spent, as I'd said, as Amma said, I spent a little bit of time working for the Prime Minister in the UK some 30 years ago now. And one of my jobs was science. So even though I was an historian, they asked me to spend time on science policy. And we put in place a thing we called the foresight system. So we tried to identify areas of technology that we thought was going to be areas of potential and which the UK science system should be investing in at a fundamental level, or investing with industry in the commercialization of. And if I look back at the areas of foresight that we identified, some of them have become significant, renewable energy, particularly material science, but others, for example, supercomputing, so far is still full of potential. Fuel cells is still full of potential. So my point is it's very hard to predict technologies and how they will be adopted and how they will be commercialized. So looking forward, the only things I can say, anything I say today can be profoundly wrong. I might be widely optimistic, or I might be horribly pessimistic in my views, and only historians in the future will be able to tell where I was right and where I was wrong. Now, just a few words about the innovation process, I think I'd like to talk quite a lot about innovation today. What I'm going to say, I hope doesn't upset you, because it's sometimes difficult for people of any country, but particularly Indians, to accept views from outside. And I should state that I've been involved with India now for 36 years. I am an OCI. I feel that India is my second country. But clearly, unlike most of you guys, I'm not Indian. So please forgive these comments and take them in the spirit that they're meant to be, which is a well-wisher and somebody who's dedicated his career and a large chunk of his life to India. I think India has an innovation challenge. I think corporate India has failed, very largely failed on innovation, large corporate India, but also, frankly, startup India. When I used to work for Tatas, which I did, I worked with Tatas for 11 years and I worked for Tatas for 6 years, we, as a leadership team, appreciated that innovation was a challenge. Broadly, most of the Tata Group, if you took steel or motors or power, or even TCS, competed on cost as we tried to take on the global majors, whether it was IBM for TCS or whether it was ArcelorMittal for steel or General Motors for Tata Motors. Largely, if we were gaining market share, it was around cost. And Mr. Tata, Ratan Tata, then tried to shift the group towards more competing on differentiation, competing on innovation. But it did require a profound transition of the culture of the group, of the investment of the group, of the capabilities of the group, the mindset of the group. And I have to say, 10 years on, that is only just part of a process which the Tatas are still on. So there are examples, obviously, of Indian innovation coming from big companies. I think the Tata Nano car was a fantastic innovation. Obviously, commercially, it was a disaster, or did not fulfill its potential. But as an innovation, as a piece of engineering, I think it was brilliant. Turning now to kind of startup India, you would expect newer companies to break the mold, to do things differently. If you're trying to break in as an entrepreneur, you should be willing to do things differently. You should be willing to do things better and to use technological innovation to compete. But even here, largely, and obviously there are examples which you can throw at me, my belief is that Indian startups have not largely competed on innovation. I wrote a book a couple of years ago that Azam kindly mentioned, where I interviewed 109 entrepreneurs. And most of those, my conclusion was, were setting up businesses based on possibly innovation of business model for Indian conditions, but very often based on the bringing to India and the adaptation to Indian conditions of technologies or product ideas from overseas. So people talk about the Uber of India or the Amazon of India and so on. There are, of course, examples, and I interviewed and included in the book a number of these, of entrepreneurs who actually came out of the science space, came out of the IITs in particular, where there was genuine breakthrough innovation on a global scale. The two that immediately spring to mind from my book are Aether Energy which came out of IIT Madras, where they've developed an electric scooter around an innovation in battery technology, developed at IIT Madras, and a company that I carry on doing a little bit of work with, Carbon Clean Solutions, CCS, which has now shifted to the UK, unfortunately, because of the funding issues here in India, which came out of IIT Kharagpur, where the innovation was around the molecules in chemical compounds for the capture of carbon in the stacks of carbon-emitting, energy-intensive industry. Broadly, however, I think my contention still remains true, which is that too few Indian companies are based on innovation. The most prominent entrepreneur I then interviewed back in 2017, who has now sold his business to a very large American company, told me that innovation was at the heart of his business. But the innovation that he offered up as an example was cash on delivery. And he claimed that was a fundamental innovation which Amazon would find it difficult to copy. I didn't believe it at the time, and I think I was right not to believe it. So why, if you accept at least part of what I'm saying, why is this the case? I think it's a very complex issue as to why innovation has not been as central to India as perhaps it might have been. It's partly, of course, because Indian industry doesn't need to innovate to compete because of an innate cost advantage, and that's fine. But I think it's also complicated in its roots in Indian society, frankly, in the Indian education system, in Indian culture. Critically, I think, in the Indian funding system. We have too few VCs in India who are willing to back technological breakthroughs. And I'm involved in a few of those. And frankly, one of them we've had to shift from India to the US. So this is an innovation around biotechnology, which we got 3 rounds of funding in India. But to get the 4th round of funding, we've had to shift it to the US because we don't have enough VCs in India who are willing to back a drug innovation in the same way that you have VCs in the US who are willing to do that. But I think it's also around, I think we need to think about why does innovation happen? And it's not just because people invest in institutions of research and have large numbers of people wearing white coats in laboratories, working, looking through test tubes and doing scientific basic research. It is, of course, about that. You have to spend money on innovation, but it's also around the need. You have to have a customer need, a requirement, a application in order to have innovation. Otherwise, the innovation remains in the lab and remains a patent, which scientific papers may be written about, but never sees the light of day. And very often, these innovations, we have a spurt of such innovation when there is a crisis. Historically, of course, that has often been connected with warfare. So if you think of all of the innovations that came out of the Second World War, along with much else human suffering, but a huge amount of innovation came out of the Second World War, whether it be the result of very big science, like the Manhattan Project, but also small teams of maybe mavericks working on shoestring budgets, doing very clever things. And I'm particularly thinking about the Bletchley Park innovation around computers. Alan Turing would be a name you know, which was not well funded and was a requirement to break the German codes in order to do intelligence. But other wars as well. The Napoleonic War similarly resulted in a spurt of innovation around ship design, around artillery, around rockets. But the innovation at that time was also around business models. So if you think about why the British won the Battle of Trafalgar, when we had the same ships as the French did, often actually ships captured from the French, so the same designs, and they were manned by people from across the world. There were a lot of Indians, actually, the Battle of Trafalgar, a lot of Americans and a lot of French people fighting on the British side. But it was around tactics, it was around leadership, it was about training, particularly around gunfire. So innovation in part comes because people invest in amazing institutions like IIT systems or the IIS or MIT, but it also comes around culture, it comes out of funding, it comes out of requirement, it comes out of urgency to innovate. So if you come back to my question as to why Indian industry has not innovated as much as I think it could do, I think the fundamental thing is around urgency, because frankly, Indian industry hasn't needed to. Turn now to the coronavirus. Clearly, the virus has had and will have, continue to have profound and really horrible impacts on many countries and societies, including my home country of the United Kingdom. You may have seen that the GDP in the UK in April fell 20% in 1 month, which is the most remarkable number which just came out this morning. My fear is that India may be just as deeply affected. India obviously is a much bigger country than the UK, and therefore we always need to look at numbers in terms of the size of population. But India is already at the point of overtaking the UK in terms of the number of cases, and sadly creeping up on the UK in terms of the number of casualties. So the challenges in India coming out of the virus, I think, could well be profound. Obviously, Mr. Modi is having to balance the economy and fundamental freedoms of the population in a democracy against the risks associated with the virus. So while there will be a huge impact on wealth generation and employment, he also needs to balance that against the requirements of the economy and the requirements of very ordinary poor people in India to have jobs and to earn wages and to feed their families. So I think there will be a recession in India as a result of the virus, and that'll have impact on startups and it'll have an impact on large companies. So it'll have an impact on employment, on investment levels, and on people's appetite for risk. It'll have an impact on R&D spending. It'll have an impact on the money the government has to do R&D spending and to back innovation. Clearly, it'll have an impact on travel and social distancing requirements, and therefore the ability of people to come together. So companies are at the moment closed or semi-closed, meetings are cancelled, universities are not fully functioning. We're doing things online like today rather than in person. You know, I would love to come to Roorkee and talk to you guys in person. It's a far more rich experience, but we have to make do with Zoom and other similar solutions. It'll have an impact on funding of governments, funding of corporations, funding of universities. So I think universities sadly will have to cut back. My own alma mater of Cambridge has already announced that its funding will be reduced next year because of the reduction in foreign students and the reduction in research programs. It'll also have a reduction on VCs. So VCs will probably invest in fewer companies in 2020, 21 and 22 than they would have done otherwise, because they need to keep their powder dry to back their portfolio companies to keep them going. I already see this in a number of companies in which I'm involved. So for example, the only company I'm involved in where we've closed around is the Swiss company called Insolite, where we have the world's most productive solar panel, where we just closed a round, a Series A round. But most of the other companies I'm involved in, it's taking longer to interest investors and longer to close funding rounds than in the past. But turn to the opportunities, and there are opportunities coming out of this. I said earlier on that innovation often comes out of challenge, and the coronavirus is nothing if it's not a fundamental challenge akin to a war situation. So I think this will throw up opportunity. People, I think, will be willing to do things differently. People will be willing to work differently and work with people they would not have worked with previously. So if you think of within a company, people will have to come together to work on a project. So barriers and silos and departmental differentiation will have to be broken down. I think people will also be willing to try different things. They'll have to rethink fundamentally their businesses or their offers or what people need. So I've just stepped off a board of a company, and I remember the CEO in one of the last board meetings I attended saying, we need to take the coronavirus to rethink our business model fundamentally, to see what we can do completely differently than we have done in the past. So I think the opportunity for young people, for technologists, and for startup companies to think outside the box, to offer new solutions, to work with people they would not have worked with in the past, to work in different ways, is tremendous. It will be difficult because lots of people will be less interested in listening than they might have in the past, but you will find people willing to listen in government. I'm strangely going on a call tomorrow afternoon with one of the ministers in the UK talking about what can the UK do to get the economy moving again. Now that would not have happened, a video call from people across the world before the virus. To turn very quickly to technology trends, and I have to stress I'm not a technologist, there are really two that I would like to highlight. And I guess my message is, my belief is, these are trends that were happening anyway. They won't surprise you. But I think the virus will, in my belief, speed up their adoption, speed up the way they become central to everything that we do as individuals, we do as companies, and opportunities for smaller and startup companies. So trend number one is digitization. It's very obvious. Digitization was already happening in our lives and our economy and our workplaces already, in our manufacturing and our supply chains. That will only be increased by the virus. Already we're doing this call and this talk, this Q&A digitally in a way which previously I would have come to Delhi and I've got the train and come up to see you guys, and we would have done a face-to-face. Now we're doing it remotely, and similarly people across the world are doing millions, if not billions, of Zoom calls, Teams calls, Google Meet calls, and Blue Jeans calls today. It seems to be what I do with my life at the moment. I have another call later on this evening. But also the way we live our lives. We are probably shopping now more than we were before the virus on e-commerce, and we are spending more of our leisure time consuming things digitally, whether it be Netflix or Amazon or Disney or whatever platform it is, or listening to music or talking to our friends in e-hangouts. Corporately, obviously people are moving faster to adopt technologies like AI, the application of big data, the digitalization of supply chain, manufacturing, warehousing. I think the supply chains will have to be redesigned. People will no longer be satisfied with taking a risk on one country, typically obviously China, or one supply chain, one supplier. So they will be looking for networks of suppliers, and very often closer to home. I think people will be looking to robotize tasks that were done previously manually, partly of course because robots don't get the virus, but also because we need more flexibility, we need more responsiveness, we need more 24/7. So things that robots and AI can do faster and quicker than humans. So people will be looking for flexible, responsive supply chains, often with more local manufacturing. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for India. Clearly fintech, more of us are doing more transactions online, using different fintech technologies online, making payments online, planning our finances online. R&D, clearly there's going to be a massive increase in R&D spend around vaccines for the virus and so on. And a lot of that is applying digital techniques to stretch research dollars, to develop drugs faster, to predict what drugs might work better. Government. I already mentioned the call I'm getting on with the UK Secretary of State tomorrow, but government is changing as a result of this. They're going online, digital parliaments, digital voting, digital hearings, digital inquiries, digital policy development. And all of these are opportunities for think tanks, for concerned citizens, but also clearly for companies, for startups. So that's my first trend, digitization, and none of you will be surprised by that. My second big mega trend coming out of the virus is, I have to say, more of a hope than digitization, but I still believe it will be advanced by the virus, and that's clean tech. I think all of us have appreciated one of the upsides of the virus, which is our skies are being clearer. Whether you live in UP or Hardwar or Roorkee or any other sizable Indian city, you've been able to see the mountains in the background in the way which you didn't for many years. You've been able to see the sky and hear the birds in a way which you have not for many years. You've been able to walk to work in ways that you've not been able to do for many years. So, in terms of the climate, this is it's a wake-up call that there are things we can do which improve the state of our climate rapidly. Obviously, we need to do that without damaging employment, jobs, and people's welfares. So how do we apply clean tech in our recovery? How do we have a cleaner growth than possibly we would have done otherwise? Quite a few countries, I think India also, are saying that help in the recovery, government support for the recovery, comes with obligations for companies to be more green. So, for example, in France, people have talked about the aerospace and the automotive bailouts being tied to greener technologies around greener aeroplanes and greener automobiles. Certainly, I mentioned that the solar panel company Insolite, on whose board I sit, which has the world's most efficient solar panel, they've got backing during the pandemic, and of course they're a clean tech. So people have been willing to close the round for them, in part because the application of their technology is very clear as part of the recovery. The Indian startup, which I'm now involved in working with a couple of Tata friends, which is called eCube, which is an ESG platform for India. Similarly, we think that we can work with corporate India through the recovery from the pandemic to embed green technologies across the supply chain, across the thinking, across the investment, across the energy use of corporate India. And there's huge opportunities for startups to get involved in that. I mentioned CCS, Carbon Cleaning Solutions, which started in IIT Kharagpur and is now based in the UK. But they've come back to India with applications for cleaning the stacks coming out of large energy-intensive Indian industries to take the carbon out and to take the particles out of the emissions. So I think it's time for me to wrap up. Let me just say in conclusion, the pandemic is obviously a serious and horrible disruptor, black swan, terrible consequences for many people. I hope all of you have remained safe and that your families have remained well. India, I have to say, is looking vulnerable to the virus because of the nature of the economy, particularly the cities. My own adopted city of Bombay is looking particularly vulnerable at the moment because of the close proximity of people and because of the healthcare. But the pandemic gives us opportunities to speed up digitization, opportunities to speed up clean tech. A crisis is always a fantastic opportunity to rethink fundamentals and for challenger startup companies. I think it's an opportunity also for universities because, to come back to my theme that India has not been innovative enough, one of the key differences in India between the startup scene in India and the startup scene in the US or China or the UK is that universities in India, the science base, places like IIT Roorkee have not played up till now the part that Stanford or Harvard or Cambridge have played in their equivalent systems in other markets. So one appeal to the IIT systems and to you guys in particular, it's not the only part of entrepreneurship, but to link VCs and entrepreneurs with the science base, with research and with training is, I think, a critical thing. You guys, I know, have an incubator, and those are fantastic, but it goes beyond just incubating. It's about the professors of engineering, the professors of material science, the professors of computing, not to look down on business, as too many professors traditionally have done, and I suspect that's, again, one of the downsides of the British colonial experience in India. You've adopted the worst bits of the UK. And the UK has moved on. So my own University of Cambridge has moved on from looking down on business. So we need to take the opportunity to rethink in universities and for the young people of India to rethink how can we make the recovery from the virus better, greener, and faster. And that's a job for entrepreneurs. So let me stop there and see whether you have any questions or whether I can pick up a couple of the questions that you circulated earlier.
Sure, Alan, wonderful. Thank you very much. First of all, I think it never felt to us that you are living in Hong Kong and not in India. The kind of depth and information which you have. So thank you very much. But you have actually touched quite many issues, which I think probably I'll ask your opinion about in slightly more detail. Just to share with you, like as we are talking, Government of India is actually looking to, they are thinking about new science, technology and innovation policy. And probably it is good to hear from you exactly what changes do you expect should be brought in the existing landscape of entrepreneurship and innovation, And definitely you talk about the role played by institutes like IIT Roorkee. How can we do things differently? What do you think? Obviously, we will engage with you on a different platform for this thing. But right now, maybe in front of the audience, if you can share with us, how exactly should we approach this issue now?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I mean, first of all, I think it is not for government to create entrepreneurial ecosystems. If you look at the history of governments that have attempted to do that, it's not particularly successful. So there are things governments can do, of course, and it is also true that Silicon Valley, of course, came out of, had its roots in US defense spending and so on. So the government has a part to play, but it is for us in business and you in academia and training and the VCs to take the lead. We can't just say to Mr. Modi and to Delhi, please do something for us. We have to do it for ourselves. In my view, the critical thing for government is to get the business ecosystem correct. And therefore, when Mr. Modi came into power, I welcomed a lot of the things he was talking about, of deregulation, of investment in infrastructure, making it easier to do business, tackling corruption, getting the banking system working, and investing critically in people, training, education, research. So all of these things are tasks for government. And I think government has a role to make things easier for entrepreneurs. But governments also, frankly, have a way at the margins to help encourage entrepreneurial activity, to speed up the way that people recover from failure. And after, we've got to remember that 90% probably of companies set up don't work. So things like insolvency, to move on without shame from a business that's failed, to pick yourself up and do it again. Just remember how many great Indian entrepreneurs that we all think of are successful actually failed the first time, the second time, the third time, including icons like Narendra Modi. He failed the first time. Mr. Mittal of Airtel, he failed multiple times before he became successful. So there is no stigma in failing. So what would I love to see the government doing? I think the number one thing the government can do is to sort out the education and the science system in India, and to encourage the universities in India to work with VCs and to work and encourage entrepreneurs. Obviously, Startup India has already begun that process, and now there are, many incubators across the country. But it's more than that. Invest in fundamental research, but also incentivize your professors and the guys working as master students, PhD students, and postdocs to take their ideas into the private sector to get back to become rich. I mean, I would love all of your students to get rich by taking an idea incubated on campus into the private sector, make money, and maybe you'd like to take the patent, share in the patent as well as a university. So sort out the policies around IP so that the IITs can get an income stream. But also you'll find that once these guys have become rich, they'll give money back to you. So also sort out the system for private individuals to back research in universities. I remember Mr. Tata telling me once how difficult it is in India for businesses to give money to universities. The Tatas, remember, set up the Indian Institute of Science, and they tried to continue to back them. They set up the Indian Atomic Program, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. But it was very hard to put money into it. So I'm delighted to see that the space system is now going to accept private money. So I think there are many things government can do, but the most important thing is to set the tone and to make it easy for entrepreneurs to create businesses, finance businesses, scale businesses, recover from failure, and sell businesses.
Maybe what I can do right now, if you can choose a couple of questions which you would like to ask, and then maybe I can ask the respective gentlemen to ask that question directly from you. Maybe that will be helpful for some interaction with the audience.
Okay. And some other questions may have come in as well, of course, since we...
If there are more questions, I'll
I mean, just one thing I'd like to add as well, and from what you said earlier on, of course, I lived in India for nearly 15 years. So, and I've been coming to the country for 36. So I'm sort of, even though I now choose to live offshore, I'm except the fact you've closed the borders. Otherwise, I would be in India at the moment. So just starting at the top of the list of questions you circulated a little while ago, why don't we take Vinay Sharma's first question, which is around the mountains and rural people. So Vinay, I don't know whether you want to come on and ask the question.
Sure, I'll just ask if he's there. Vinay Sharma. Yes, I'm. Can you please unmute him? Vinay, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
Please go ahead with the question.
so that Mr. Rosling can see me. Good afternoon, Alan. How are you?
Good, thank you. Go ahead.
So, actually, I'm interested in having an insight on what is, that we can do in terms of innovating upon small things for making life better in Himalayas and hilly areas where the rough terrain and poverty is the highest of the levels.
Vinay, thank you for the question. I mean, I obviously love the Indian mountains. I spend as much time as I can in the Himalayas. So it's a question close to my heart. I think one of the fantastic things, of course, with digitization is a lot of things going to have to be remotely distributed. My last business in India was solar power, and that's another kind of digital technology in a way, and it's also silicon based. So again, a modular technology, which means that with telecommunications, with the internet, and with distributed power, there are many things that you can do remotely and distributed in small communities, and you can sell to people across the world, whether it be something around crafts or agricultural products. There's so many things I see when I travel to India now coming out of the mountains in terms of clothing, in terms of food items, in terms of crafts and products, but not just those. And there are digital businesses of every sort that can be run from Dehradun or further up the hills, or Darjeeling, or further up the hills in Sikkim or wherever. So, or even Kashmir. So the potential for applying technologies to remote places, I think is incredible. I cannot tell you what those technologies can produce. That's the job of entrepreneurs. Of course, if I had a great idea, I'd be doing it myself. I'd be living in Darjeeling, which is one of my favorite places in the world, doing something exciting and making myself a lot of money. And of course, you can do that now. So I wish all of you luck in thinking of something you could live in a beautiful place and still be connected to the world's economy.
Thank you, Alan. Actually, I just asked this question because we have been attempting on these kind of things. So I am a professor of strategy here at IIT Roorkee. And along with my group, we have developed world's first small machine for compressing pine needles into energy briquettes. So we are converting those pine leaves into energy briquettes, and for household usage and for being sold in the nearby areas. So it is working fine, but you see, that has instigated a process where we have started thinking on what next to be done. That's why
Okay. Well, we need clever people like you, Vinay, to do that. Could we ask Pooja Agarwal, because I really liked her question about apparel brands. Is Pooja on?
Could you please repeat the name? What's the name?
Pooja Agarwal, who asked a question about apparel startups. Yeah, I don't know whether she is there.
No, Pooja is not there in the audience today, so maybe we can ask for some other question.
Okay. Another question which caught my eye, because it's a question I ask myself most days. Akash Khan asked, how can we find an investor? So I don't know whether Akash is on.
Yeah. Can you see if Akash is there? Otherwise, this is a question which actually most of the people have asked. So probably we can respond to it anyhow, because investment and funding is definitely an issue which is core to startup and entrepreneurship, especially like you mentioned, we have scarce resources, we have scarce funding opportunities. So how do you as an investor choose a company and go about it?
Okay, I think it's a very hard question. And it's one of the puzzles of life that in the world where data, connectivity, and AI are becoming so important, the process of raising money still feels like a drunken walk back from the pub. It's often a matter of hard work, luck, and perseverance. So the number of people you speak to who've raised money, who will tell you horror stories about the way they were treated, the people who said no, the number of people who said no. So clearly there is an art to it, not a science. There's an art to it. You need to think. First of all, you need to have a good idea. You need to package that idea well, and you need to have a good team. You need to be clear on your marketplace and clear on your business plan. You then need to think, who is it that might invest behind something like this in terms of the technology, the sector, the stage, the size of the ticket, the location, etc., and not approach the wrong type of investor. So don't waste your time, talking to KKR if you're looking for a VC investment. But beyond that, frankly, it's often about just hard work. So I've raised money, I don't know how many times now, 10 times for different things, sometimes debt, but particularly equity for different things. And always I go about it the same way. I produce a list of people I think, from my understanding and research, like this type of idea, invest in this type of concept at its stage with this ticket size. And then I find a way to approach them. Very often in India, because India is about relationships, it's effective to go not directly, but indirectly. You find someone who knows the person. So relationships matter. And if you're a startup, creating very often an advisory board or have some mentors is very important, because those guys know people you don't and can ask people to spend time with you in a way which, if you approach them cold, they might not agree to. But frankly, it's also a matter of luck and just hard work. And just don't be dispirited, because, as I said earlier on, the most successful people often struggled to raise money. But you've got to be sensible about it. You've got to have a really good idea, and you've got to think from the investor's point of view, think about the questions and concerns they will have and address them head on. And then just go into the market and keep going. And if your idea is a good one, the chances are that you will succeed. And if you don't succeed, pick yourself up and do it again with another idea.
Alan, like we have typically most of the startups which we are trying to help over here are mostly B2B startups. Like they have a product, or most of the time they have a technology which they are working for. And as you rightly said, that this technology is most of the time backed by professors, because they have niche understanding and research work to back that technology. But they do not have maybe the same level of business acumen on how to sell it off. And so there are some skill sets which they should be looking for, especially while building a team or selling their product to the market or raising funds, which they should basically focus upon.
Okay, so I work closely with a good friend who is based in Calcutta, Rajiv Mantri of Navam Capital. And Navam's objective, Rajiv used to work in Lux Capital in the US, which had a similar model. So what Rajiv is trying to do is identify science-based innovation at a very early stage, often on campus or in similar institutions of research, and working with them, these companies, to take it through to later stage funding. So the biotech company that I mentioned, for example, on whose board I sit, which is now flipped to Princeton, New Jersey, started in this way. The prof there is actually is based at Harvard, but all of the research work was done in India. The guy is ex-AIMS in Delhi. There's a guy called Professor Sengupta, and he has spun out three companies now, of which Rajiv has backed two of them. The company on whose board I sit is in Dermatech. So we're trying to produce a drug for drug-resistant acne, but there's a stream of products coming out of the laboratory in Delhi as well beyond that. So there are people who do this. Now, how do we do it? Well, mentoring, as I said, is very important. Sometimes incubation can help, but my recommendation to people who are on campus, who are working with profs, is as early as can get some business people involved as mentors, directors, or angel investors. Build your networks and spend time talking to people in industry and particularly potential customers. So if I think of the model that Aether Energy used coming out of IIT Kharagpur, what they did was they got an early stage seed investment by chance, frankly, from the guys who got Flipkart going. And then Flipkart brought in more formal investment from Tiger. And then eventually they got Hero Honda to be a big investor, and then other investors. So reach out to people, spend your time networking, both about the product and the application. Go talk to potential customers, but also spend time talking to potential investors to hone your idea. There's no point, being in stealth mode and suddenly think you're going to emerge with a brilliant idea, and VCs will think you're, the next Jesus Christ or Buddha, and you can walk on water and they'll immediately back you. It won't be like that. So just get out in the market, get out of campus, go and talk to people, and find people to work with you as angel investors, as mentors, as board directors, as friends. It's an incredible thing in India how people will help as friends, will give you advice, will spend a Saturday afternoon talking to you, and just, do that. Get involved in ecosystems. We're beginning to see clustering now, and I hope IT Rookie will become a cluster around engineering, perhaps. But there are clusters around, biotech in Bangalore or fintech in Bombay and Delhi. So get involved in the ecosystems around clusters, because you will only learn.
So in the meanwhile, we have one question from Balaji. If you can unmute Balaji, he can ask this question.
Hello, Alan. So I'm in my final year in mechanical engineering right now, and I really like your ideas about possible areas of growth and trend post lockdown and post pandemic. So I'm currently looking for an idea for my capstone project for my graduation. So are there any, for places like Mumbai, for example, are there any major problems that you think might come up that we as students, upcoming engineers, need to address?
Well, yes, everything. But the great thing is, I don't have to have the ideas, right? You guys have to. The one thing I know is that India is absolutely teeming with incredibly smart young people like you. And you think differently from, my generation and your grandparents' generation. So, you're smart to see all of the needs. So go find, obviously you've got to find something you're interested in, something which is close to your area of research or interest, of your degree, but also where there's a need out there in society, and, go do it. I can't tell you what that is. If I was again a young person, I could think of things I would like to do, but I'm not a mechanical engineer. I'll give you one example of sort of thing. When I was working in number 10 in the UK, I tried to get the UK to adopt electronic road pricing, because I think it is a technology we need. Why should our streets be full of motor cars polluting without paying the full price, while those people traveling on buses and underground railways or working from home, are subsidizing those guys sitting in cars. In India, very often with a driver at the front and one guy sitting at the back of his car blocking the street and polluting the economy. So why don't we charge for road use and use that money to subsidize transport, to subsidize job creation, to subsidize research and development in clean tech? So I would love to see Bombay introduce a road pricing system for the use of its roads and try to reduce its congestion. Now, that's a need in Bombay, in my view, to transfer that money to public transport, or subsidizing those poor guys who have to spend 2 hours on a train both ways every day, and the rich people coming from Malabar Hill or wherever they're coming from in their cars, being subsidized by the government with, subsidized diesel and subsidized road use. That's just one thing that I believe in. You're a mechanical engineer, so maybe EVs, battery systems. There's so many things whose time is coming. And, only you as a smart young guy will know what interests you and that you want to work on.
We have another, Mr. Kevin Patel. He wants to ask a question from you. Kevin, Kevin, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask two questions. First of all, what changes should we make in our syllabus and our teaching methods in the education system so that we can encourage young minds to join research and entrepreneurship? And
Okay.
second of all, as you are very much into the solar panel, or you have a history with solar panels, would you recommend we as a group of people, my friends, are going to work on recycling of solar panels? As you know, post 25 years or 30 years, the solar panels will be useless and they would need recycling and proper disposal. So I have searched and browsed on the internet. There seems not to be an infrastructure for that. So we are kind of working on that. So would you recommend it going in that direction, or what changes would you recommend?
Okay, Kevin. So two great questions. Thank you for those. Education. Look, I can't comment in detail on the Indian education system. My kids had about 5 or 6 years in the Indian education system. So I've got some prejudices as a result of St. Xavier's Calcutta and then an international school. I personally think that the Indian educational system is too exam-based, too rote-based. There's a right and wrong answer. Now, I'm going to upset some of you guys again, and please forgive me. I'm a foreigner, but let me say it. I think you are too deferential to people who are senior to you, and I know that's the Indian culture. But I would love younger people to feel comfortable having different views and challenging, and not just regurgitating what they're told. I remember my eldest kid once got very upset in school because he'd been marked down for an exam where he'd spelt Julius Caesar's name correctly when the teacher did not know how to spell the name and therefore was using the book, which had a typo in it, and saying that that was the way you spelled Caesar. And it didn't matter whether it was AE or EA in the name, and you just had to repeat whatever the book said. The other thing, I know that from my work with Cambridge in India, Cambridge University in India, that where we're partnering with Indian research institutions, there is incredible cutting edge research going on in India. But typically a lot of it is underfunded. And typically the way the funding is given to research teams, in my view, is suboptimal. So research is often given to the institution rather than to the team, so that the professor who runs the department has the power and the people who are doing the research don't necessarily have the flexibility. So I would love to see Indian professors having more freedom, being paid more, being able to take private sector top-ups. Why can't IIT profs earn the same as guys at Harvard Business School or MIT? And why can't they benefit from patents in the same way as a prof at MIT does? So I think the university sector has got a lot of change to go through, but as a foreigner and somebody who's not close enough, I wouldn't want to comment in detail. You guys know what the problems are. All I can say is the potential of Indian educational and research institutes to be the world's best is there. It might take 20, 30 years. It might happen, with some of the ITs first and then some others later. But, let it happen. Let quality develop in India, in the education system, rather than it being held back by, ideas of equality or ideas of socialism, which in today's global competitive age, so let's have a quality of access rather than a quality of outcome. But that's just a pure prejudice. But, you guys, I think the bottom line is you guys know the changes that need to be made, go make them.
Yeah, I think in this case, probably I should add here something that in IITs at least, we have a well-defined IPR policy, we have a well-defined faculty entrepreneurship policy, where we do not just allow, but also encourage and motivate and proactively assist them that they should come out and commercialize their research. That is, we are running projects like from lab to market. So basically how to bring out. But I would agree with you that, yeah, system needs to be strengthened much more as it has been there in Europe and US. So probably we need to work upon strengthening the system. But yeah, IITs provide a lot of freedom for the professors, students who actually work upon ideas, global ideas, promote them. So yeah, I would say that yes, the system is there. Probably we need to much more add some more oil to it, so it is fully functional and the drag is less. So I'll invite another question from Nikhil Ram, and maybe this is among the last few questions which we are now taking up. It's almost time now. So Nikhil, can you please go ahead with your question?
So a very nice lecture. So my question is, sir, what is the scope of materials and design consultation for the industries as a startup idea, especially if you're assessing the post pandemic situation. When currently the small scale and the medium scale industries, they don't usually have R&D, or mostly they focus on just manufacturing of products. So for them as a consultancy, with such post-pandemic situation where they are mostly looking to cut or downsize their production costs, is there a scope for a startup as a consultancy for materials and design?
Okay, I mean, I honestly don't know. The one thing is clear is that material science, if you were going to do a foresight exercise in the way that I described we did in the early 90s in the UK for our science base, you would have material science as one of the areas, along with digital, along with biotech and so on, as one of the areas of interest. And again, go back to my work with Cambridge in India. One of the areas that Cambridge is trying to work with Indian institutions in partnership is around materials, whether it be metals or new materials. Clearly, it's an area of strength of the Indian system, strength of Indian universities is around metallurgy, fundamental science, polymers, nano, etc. So I think it's an area of great potential. If you think about my argument about eco requirements, light weighting, reduction without sacrificing strength and performance, having lighter materials, having materials that can be recycled. Oh, by the way, I didn't cover off the solar question that the previous questioner asked. Let me come back to that, and apologies. So all I'm saying is in material science, there's a huge requirement. I don't know whether the consulting route for SMEs and medium-sized companies is the appropriate one. The problem with those guys, obviously, is they don't spend money, and often they don't like paying people. So whether it's a productive route or whether you should try to innovate in a different way, I don't know. So I think you should go into the market and see where you can apply your skills most effectively and make a business out of it. But the area, I think, is very interesting. Let me just come back to the question of recycling solar panels. I think it's a really exciting idea. Solar panels at the end of 25 years don't disappear. They carry on generating. But of course, because of degradation, they're just less productive. And therefore, they might be at 40% or something of their original efficiency, and therefore potential to be repowered, so stripped out and replaced by a more modern and more efficient panel. The case may be there. So I think the requirement for recycling solar panels and recovering the materials, particularly obviously the metals, and disposing safely of some of the nasties, some of the leads and the mercuries and the arsenic and the gallium and all this sort of stuff that's in there. I think it's a very interesting business model. But because solar panels, frankly, have a life which goes beyond 25 years, it may be a little while before there's a very big market for it. Yeah. So Azam, are we going to do a last question or?
I think this was the last question. But before we let you, we say thanks to you. I have one more question, because when I was going through your book, the topic was pretty interesting. You put up a question mark after boom country. What exactly does that question mark stand for?
Okay, well, clearly India at the moment is not a boom country, right? So I said the UK in April, negative 20% GDP. The danger is that India certainly was not booming before the virus and maybe going into recession as a result of the virus. So the question mark is there because India is a country to me which is so full of opportunity, potential, excitement, and the future, and yet historically just seems to not quite get things right. And typically in the past, I've blamed the politicians. I think India has been, despite the intelligence of so many Indian leaders over the last 70 years, frankly, the political system has not served the Indian citizen very well. And I'm not arguing for something authoritarian or China-like or anything like that. I think one of the great things about India, it is a democracy, and there is the rule of law, and people have rights, and people have property rights, etc. People can say what they think. But still, Indian politicians have not delivered the policies which, in my view, and admittedly, I come from a more free market and libertarian type of view of the world than many people in India. But frankly, India has underperformed. And this is partly because as a democracy, sometimes it's easier to appeal to people's fears, people's backgrounds, people's castes, people's fear of other people, whether it be minorities or whether it be foreigners. So I listened to the Prime Minister last week at the CII, and he was talking about self-reliant India. Bharat, and I can't tell you what the Hindi word for self-reliant was. I forget. So my apologies. But for me, India is a country which will thrive with competition. You know, the Americans are terrified of Indian costs, which is why Trump is trying to impose visas and restrictions on Indian business. So why is it that India doesn't have the self-confidence to compete freely? One of the things that the government has done in the last few months, which has affected me personally, is introduce Press Note 3, which means that all investment coming into India from neighboring countries has to get prior Indian approval. Now, neighboring countries obviously is targeted at China, and Hong Kong, unfortunately, is part of China. So when I want to put more money into my business in Mumbai, I will have to go now and go back to some equivalent of the Foreign Investment Promotion Board that I used to call the Foreign Investment Prevention Board, that I spent 20 years of my life struggling with and was abolished. And now we'll be back there where to invest into an Indian startup or to invest into my own business, I will have to get permission of the government. And while they may say, of course, Alan, we like you, we'll give you permission, I still have to make an application. I will have to justify who I am. I will have to, fill out forms. And there is the potential for some babu in Delhi to object, or my competitor to sidle up to the babu in Delhi and say, look, Alan's a foreigner. We really don't want him setting up in India, business in India. He might take away my business. So why is it that foreigners are not allowed to invest in shops in India? To me, it's crazy that Walmart is not allowed to do, to own supermarkets in India, and why Amazon is not allowed to do online retailing. To me, I would love to have Amazon doing online retailing in India and Walmart having big box retailing in India. So by all means, have competition law, but don't have restrictions which, determine whether you can invest based on, what your background is or what your passport is, except in very few areas of national security, which are frankly very few. So to answer your question, I think we need politicians of a different generation who have confidence in India's ability to compete and win based on India's abilities and competitive strengths, not people who are fearful of the future and who are fearful of Americans or Brits, or particularly now the Chinese. You guys can beat the Chinese. There's nothing that China can do which you can't do, just as well, if not better.
That's so good to hear, Alan, that definitely we can beat China, and I'm sure that decision makers must have some reasons to act the way they have acted, maybe in the near past, because of pandemic situation or what. We would not comment upon that, but yeah, I mean, it's really nice to hear all your views in this very brief talk. We hope that this question mark is actually replaced by an exclamation mark or something else, which would be more kind of an explanatory of the kind of work which we are doing here in India. So thank you very much, Alan. And we would like to engage with you even more. Look forward to have another interaction with you maybe in near future. But till then, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule.
Okay. Thank you very much, Azan. Very nice to meet you all. And I really look forward to, when post-virus, the ability to come up to Roorkee and meet you all in person.